The greatest crisis silently spreading through Catholic souls today is not open rebellion, but the slow death of authentic prayer. The lips still move, the hands still fold, but the heart grows silent inside. Pope Leo XIV warns, "The danger is not when prayer stops entirely. The danger is when prayer continues outwardly while dying inwardly." So many attend Mass faithfully, recite the Rosary daily, even kneel before icons. Yet their souls feel dry, distracted, untouched. They confess, "I pray but I do not feel God. My prayers rise but heaven feels silent." This is not always a punishment. Often, it is a symptom of how prayer has become routine, emptied of hunger, stripped of encounter. Saint Teresa of Avila once sighed, "To speak much in prayer is not necessary, but to love much." But the modern Catholic often approaches prayer as an obligation to fulfill, a box to check, rather than as a meeting of souls. The Our Father is whispered, but the heart thinks of tomorrow's burdens. The Hail Mary is repeated, but without contemplating the mysteries. The Eucharist is received, but the soul quickly moves on to the next task. Pope Leo XIV teaches, "The prayer that does not cost you attention soon costs you intimacy." Distraction is not new. Even the saints battled wandering thoughts. But what separates the saint from the lukewarm is not the absence of distraction, but the refusal to grow comfortable in it. The modern world feeds this collapse daily. Screens flash endlessly, noise surrounds every moment, minds spin under 1,000 obligations. And so, when silence comes, the heart panics. It no longer knows how to rest before God without stimulation. The devil rejoices in this fatigue. He no longer needs to tempt Catholics into rebellion when simple distraction suffices to empty their prayer life. But the soul was not created for mechanical prayers. It was made for burning communion. What makes this collapse even more dangerous is its comfort. The soul feels no crisis because the exterior forms remain. The daily prayers are said. The Mass is attended. The Rosary beads move steadily through the fingers. And so, many believe they are spiritually healthy, while their hearts quietly drift into numbness. Pope Leo XIV teaches, "The deadliest form of prayer is not silence. It is prayer performed without presence." This is the seduction of routine. It allows the Catholic to feel secure while slowly surrendering depth. The prayers become like background music, familiar but no longer stirring the soul. The words are right, but the heart no longer listens to them. St. John Chrysostom once warned, "The tongue may move in prayer while the heart sleeps." The danger here is not that routine itself is bad. In fact, routine is essential for spiritual discipline. The problem arises when the soul no longer fights to remain awake within the routine. Prayer without attention becomes a comfortable illusion, offering a sense of duty fulfilled without transformation. The world feeds this illusion. It teaches efficiency in everything, even in the spiritual life. Prayers must be quick. Mass must fit the schedule. Silence becomes uncomfortable. And slowly the sacred is compressed into convenience. Pope Leo XIV warns, "When prayer becomes efficient, it loses its power. When it becomes rushed, it loses its weight." True prayer always costs something. It demands attention, interior surrender, vulnerability before God. It asks the soul to pause, to enter into mystery, to allow God to speak and pierce the heart. Without this surrender, prayer becomes words floating upward, never touching either heaven or the soul. The saints wept not because their prayers were long, but because their hearts were open. They allowed God to wound them with love, to disturb their comfort, to transform their desires. The modern Catholic must ask, do I pray to meet God or do I pray to feel pious? The difference is eternity itself. Beneath the collapse of living prayer lies a wound even deeper, the loss of silence. For many Catholics, prayer has become an endless stream of words. Requests, intentions, formulas, all spoken, rarely listened. The soul speaks much but hears little. Pope Leo XIV teaches, prayer begins where words end and listening begins. True prayer is not merely speaking to God but opening oneself to His voice. Yet today many fear silence. When the words stop, restlessness rises. The mind rushes to fill the emptiness with more words, more thoughts, more petitions, anything to avoid facing the stillness where God waits. St. John of the Cross once wrote, "The Father spoke one word, which is His Son, and He speaks it always in eternal silence." The modern Catholic has been formed by noise. Silence feels unnatural. Yet silence is the sacred language of heaven. The saints entered into silence not to escape the world, but to meet the God who speaks gently. In stillness, the soul learns to perceive His whisper, His consolation, His correction. Pope Leo XIV warns, A soul that cannot sit in silence before God will struggle to recognize His voice when He speaks. Even within the Mass, holy silence has been exchanged for constant activity. The spaces once left for quiet adoration after communion are filled with hurry. The soul receives Christ, but the moment of intimate dialogue quickly dissolves into distraction. But it is often in these quiet moments, kneeling after receiving the Eucharist, resting before the tabernacle, sitting in stillness after the rosary, that the greatest graces are offered. It is here the soul is pierced. It is here wounds are exposed. It is here healing begins. Without silence, prayer becomes performance. With silence, prayer becomes communion. The Catholic soul must rediscover the courage to be still, to sit before God without agenda, without expectation, without fear. In that stillness, God moves. And the heart, finally quiet, can hear Him again. At the very center of true prayer stands a requirement many avoid: vulnerability. The soul must stand naked before God, exposed, unguarded. Yet many Catholics, even while praying, hide their hearts behind polished words and safe petitions, never daring to reveal their real wounds. Pope Leo XIV teaches, God seeks not your performance in prayer, but your surrender. The danger is subtle. Catholics approach prayer as duty but not as encounter. They confess general weaknesses but avoid naming specific chains. They ask for general blessings but resist inviting God into their most guarded fears, failures, and attachments. The soul learns to negotiate with God rather than surrender. St. Augustine confessed with brutal honesty, I was afraid you would hear me too soon, and heal me too quickly from my sins I loved. This is the silent war within the soul, a longing for God's healing but a terror of what healing might cost. For true prayer always carries the risk of transformation. It invites God to rearrange not only circumstances but desires, habits, and comforts. And many, though they whisper prayers daily, inwardly resist this. Pope Leo XIV warns, prayer that does not permit God to wound will never permit Him to heal. The saints teach that the most powerful prayer is often the most painful, when the soul lays before God its attachments, its failures, its shame, not to explain or justify but to surrender. The confessional becomes a throne of victory only because the soul stops hiding. So too, private prayer becomes alive when the masks fall away. The modern Catholic must ask, do I pray to remain safe or to be changed? Until the soul dares to say, Lord, I give you everything, even what I do not want to surrender, prayer remains shallow. But when vulnerability opens the door, grace rushes in like floodwaters. And the soul, though wounded, begins to burn. Another subtle deception lures many Catholic souls into dryness, the expectation of constant spiritual feelings. When prayer once stirred emotion, tears, or peace, many grow discouraged when these consolations fade. They believe God has withdrawn, or worse, that their prayer has lost value. Pope Leo XIV teaches, the worth of your prayer is not measured by what you feel, but by whom you seek. Feelings are a gift, but they are not the foundation. God, in His wisdom, often removes sensible consolation so that the soul may learn to love Him for Himself, not for the sweetness He gives. True love remains when emotion fades. True faith perseveres when the senses feel nothing. St. John of the Cross called this the dark night of the soul. It is not punishment but purification, a deeper invitation into mature love. The soul learns to kneel not because it feels inspired, but because God is worthy. Pope Leo XIV warns, many abandon prayer not because God has left them, but because He is inviting them deeper, beyond feelings into fidelity. The modern world feeds the illusion that everything must feel good to be real. But the saints lived another law, perseverance. They prayed when dry. They adored when empty. They worshipped when the heavens seemed silent. And through that faithfulness, their love deepened. The Catholic who relies on spiritual feelings will not endure long. But the one who prays out of sheer fidelity, who says, though I feel nothing, still I come, becomes unshakable. For this is the prayer that pleases God most. Pope Leo XIV concludes, God does not ask you to feel Him. He asks you to trust Him. When trust replaces feelings, the soul is finally free. And grace, often unseen, works most powerfully in the silence. In our time, one of the fiercest battles takes place before every Catholic who kneels to pray, the war for attention. Never before has the soul faced such an unrelenting flood of distraction. Screens, notifications, worries, schedules, all compete for space in the mind, even as lips whisper sacred words. Pope Leo XIV warns, the devil no longer needs to persecute prayer if he can simply scatter it. The danger is not always sinful distraction, but constant interruption. The Catholic enters prayer, but his mind wanders quickly to obligations, conversations, future plans, or distant anxieties. Even the sacred is pushed aside by the urgent. Saint Francis Delaware Sales, who understood the struggle deeply, once counseled, "If your mind wanders 1,000 times, bring it back 1,000 times." The devil uses these distractions not only to weaken prayer, but to tempt the soul into discouragement. Many begin to believe that since their prayer is so fragmented, it must be worthless. They question whether God even listens. Pope Leo XIV teaches, "The merit of prayer is not in its perfection but in its perseverance." Each time the mind returns to God, even weakly, it is an act of humility and spiritual warfare. The soul that refuses to quit, that continues to kneel, continues to whisper, continues to seek, grows stronger in ways unseen. The saints remind us that even the most distracted prayer, offered with honest desire, draws grace. The more the soul fights to reclaim its attention, the more God responds with patience, mercy, and strength. Yet this battle also requires discipline. The Catholic must learn to prepare for prayer, to silence the phone, to quiet the room, to enter into stillness. The mind, like the body, must be trained to enter the sacred moment. Pope Leo XIV concludes, "Attention is not a gift, it is a labor of love." The soul that labors in this hidden fight will one day find itself drawn more easily into peace. And there, in that hard-won stillness, God will meet it. As personal prayer weakens, another danger follows closely, the fading of intercessory prayer, that mighty work where Catholics once stood between heaven and earth, pleading for souls, for families, for the world. Today, many have reduced prayer to private petitions, forgetting the power entrusted to them as intercessors. Pope Leo XIV teaches, "When Catholics cease to pray for others, they surrender ground to the enemy." The saints understood that prayer was not merely for personal comfort but for battle. Saint Monica wept for years for her son Augustine, storming heaven until his conversion. Saint Padre Pio bore wounds not only for himself, but for countless souls who came to him in desperation. But many Catholics now quietly assume that their prayers hold little power, that God acts regardless of their petitions. This passive surrender robs countless souls of the grace God wishes to release, grace often held back, waiting for someone to ask. Saint Alphonsus Liguori wrote, "He who prays saves himself and others. He who does not pray is lost." The enemy delights when Catholics forget their priestly role as intercessors. Marriages crumble, children wander, vocations dry up, while so few rise at night to whisper, "Lord, have mercy." The Church suffers not from lack of programs, but from lack of souls willing to kneel in the gap. Pope Leo XIV warns, "A church that does not intercede becomes a church that watches while evil advances." Yet even now, heaven leans close, waiting for new intercessors to rise. The power of a single rosary, offered with faith, shakes the foundations of hell. The prayer of a mother, whispered through tears, can bring home a lost son. The plea of one soul before the blessed sacrament can unleash torrents of grace upon an entire parish. Intercessory prayer is not a small work, it is a hidden war. And God entrusts this battlefield to his faithful. Pope Leo XIV concludes, "The soul that kneels for others becomes the hand through which heaven touches the earth." Though prayer has grown cold in many hearts, the fire can still return. God has not withdrawn his grace, it is we who have drifted. But even now, heaven watches for the soul willing to rise again, to reclaim prayer as encounter, as battle, as love. Pope Leo XIV proclaims, "The miracle is not when the sinner avoids prayer, but when the cold soul begins to burn again." The path back is not complicated. It begins with humility, to admit distraction, lukewarmness, fear, and pride. To kneel again and whisper, even weakly, "Lord, teach me to pray." Heaven hears that cry more clearly than 1,000 eloquent words. The saints did not pray because they were strong. They prayed because they were desperate. Their tears were not signs of failure, but of hunger. They burned not because they mastered prayer techniques, but because they surrendered. Pope Leo XIV teaches, "God does not wait for perfect prayers. He waits for honest hearts." The rosary, once rushed, can again become a chain that binds the soul to Mary. The Eucharist, once received mechanically, can once more pierce the heart with awe. The silent hour before the tabernacle can become a furnace where the soul is refined. The Catholic who reclaims prayer reclaims power. Not power for self, but authority for others. The intercessor who rises daily becomes a shield for his family, his parish, his nation. Heaven listens to the soul that refuses to stop praying. The battle for prayer is not simply personal, it is ecclesial. When Catholic prayer returns to fire, The Church herself will rise again in power, clarity, and holiness. Pope Leo XIV declares, "The world does not fear a Catholic who speaks. It fears a Catholic who prays." And so, the invitation stands for every soul: return to burning prayer. The Church waits. Heaven waits. The world trembles before the soul who dares to kneel again.